Welcome everyone if you're just joining us. My name is Gisela Carbonell. I am the curator at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum here at Rollins College. And I am very excited to have you join us tonight. We have three very special speakers for the second part of Artist Talks that started last week. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Professor Don Rowe, Professor Rachel Simmons, and Professor Lee Lines. Their works are part of the 2021 Faculty Biennial, which is on view at the museum until August 29th. So if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, make your plan and come see it. You can also view the works taking a virtual 360 tour on our website. We'll share more of that information with you at the end. So tonight we have two parts to this presentation. We're going to hear first from Professor Don Rowe, and then we're going to have a time for, right after her presentation, a time for questions and answers. And then we're going to hear from Professor Rachel Simmons and Professor Lee Lines. Professor Don Rowe teaches photography and digital imaging courses here at Rollins. Her research focuses on temporality and memory in relation to the camera image. She has exhibited here in Florida, in the US, and internationally, and we are delighted to welcome her tonight. Hello, Don.
Am I live? I can tell. Oh, it's counting down. So here I am. Hello. Thank you, Gisela. Thank you, everyone. I think I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, or ask Lainey to please share my screen for me, which she is doing. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pop over here. So sorry, yeah. So again, hello, everyone. So thanks to those of you that are here now, and to anyone who might be viewing this recording at a later time. I want to make sure I can sort of advance through these slides correctly. But so basically, I'm just going to kind of dive right into some installation views of my works that are included in the exhibition. And this image here gives you just kind of a general sense of how you would encounter my work in the space if you were to walk next door to where I am right now, to the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. But I also just want to say that I'm super grateful to have this opportunity to show my work with my colleagues in this way, and always really thankful to the entire CFAM staff for supporting our work and really giving us free rein to explore our ideas in kind of any way that we'd like to, and really supporting that, and in such an important space on our campus. So big thanks to them. So here's another view that includes the interior of the screening room, where the video component is on view, and you just kind of make your way through that door into that screening space. And I do hope that a lot of you have a chance to make your way over to see the entire exhibition. It's really great to see the faculty work all together in this way. So the plan for tonight is I'm just going to share some thoughts with you about the works that are currently on view, and it's from my series Wretched You. And this is a project that looks closely at the yew tree as kind of a point of departure for thinking through a number of things that I'll touch on this evening. But the work takes several forms. You can see these photo-based prints, the single channel video that I mentioned, and also this limited edition artist book this book was designed to accompany the debut of this work that occurred last fall at Tracy Morgan Gallery in Asheville, North Carolina. So before I dive right in, though, it's probably important to contextualize this project in relation to this ongoing multi-part series, Conditions for an Unfinished Work of Mourning. And this is a project that draws upon a kind of heaviness or weight present in certain sites within the landscape, and how these aspects correspond with grief. And some of you might recall seeing this work here in our last faculty exhibition here at CFAM a few years ago. So this project connected with the overlapping histories embedded within the coastal trails throughout the Pyrenees Mountains that are along the Spain-France border. And sorry, these mountain passes were used as routes of exile for refugees during World War II and the Spanish Civil War. And one of these refugees was widely known to be Frankfurt School theorist Walter Benjamin, who of course wrote extensively about film and photography. And so Benjamin's untimely death in 1940 during one of these passages was a particular focus of this aspect of the project. Sorry. So these are some install views from 2 subsequent iterations of this work at a couple of different spaces. And I just want to acknowledge that it was this series that really kind of established my desire to extend my approach to photographic practice a bit by returning to one of its most basic techniques. So the photogram and direct contact printing, just really using the light of the sun to expose the images. And I wanted to incorporate these methods that would allow for the recording of duration. So imprinting time directly onto a print, rather than being always so concerned with any kind of precise resemblance. So including myself in the video footage in that project, so performing this kind of labor of making was also initiated with this work. And this is an aspect that has definitely continued in Wretched You. And so these 2 images here can be seen in the current show at CFAM. And you're probably noting a pretty immediate aesthetic difference, as most of the material for this project was made or collected in the Pacific Northwest. And its light and topography is pretty distinct from those really intense blues of the Mediterranean region. And this is an aspect that I kind of embraced, and it led me to use kind of a few different methods with this project as well. But I want to get back to the book for a moment, as the way I conceived of the book in terms of its purpose was really to function as a sort of container for all the varied components of the Wretched You project. So in terms of research, process, material, and also tone. So it was structured to echo kind of the emotive arc of the video piece, and also contains this a similar kind of disrupted ebb and flow. So as mentioned earlier, this book was a component of the initial exhibition of this work, and you can see an installation view on the book page spread here, which is next to the opening passage of the essay that runs throughout. And I just want to acknowledge that I was incredibly fortunate to have my friend, film and art historian Lisa Zayer, write the essay for this book, as she has been one of my main collaborators in thinking for many years now, and her contribution was just incredibly meaningful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to use pages from the book to guide the remarks for the remainder of this talk, and kind of drawing on notions of fragmentation that Lisa Zayer sets up in the essay. And if I do this right, I think you'll have a pretty good sense of what informed this project and how it came to take this or these forms and shapes by the time I'm done. If not, it should be fun anyway, I hope. But so yeah, I want to start with this just isolated line from a Bertolt Brecht poem written in 1939 that's included early on in the book. He asks, "What times are these in which a conversation about trees is almost a crime?" And about a decade earlier, Virginia Woolf was writing her novel, The Waves, a book I've returned to again and again over the years. And this is really where my focus on the yew tree began. But she writes, "A mysterious illumination," said Louis, "visible against those yew trees. Built up with much pain, many strokes," said Ginny. "Let us stop for a moment. Let us behold what we have made. Let it blaze against the yew trees. One life, there, it is over, gone out." So fixating on this passage again and again over time ultimately led me to start researching the complex mythological associations of the yew, which is really known as a symbol of both death and regeneration. And so the trees that Woolf would have been writing about were Taxus baccata, or English yew. But my research led me to another species of yew, Taxus brevifolia, or Pacific yew, not surprisingly native to the Pacific Northwest. And this is a region where I lived myself for 10 years in the 1990s, and continue to visit regularly and really think of as a sort of home. And it was really awful to learn that this particular tree in the image that you see on the right was under direct threat during the most recent wildfires, last fall, but it thankfully remains. And you can see in this evacuation zone map, it depicts the location of that yew in relation to the fires in the fall. But so the Pacific yew, the species, has its own particular kind of set of histories. And one aspect is detailed in this passage from a USDA publication that I included in the book that tells us, upon the discovery of Taxol, an anti-cancer agent from the tissues of the Pacific yew, the species received much attention. Prior to this, Pacific yew was indiscriminately removed during clear-cut logging operations with no provision for regeneration or consideration of the effects on the population as a whole. So Dana Haraway's thinking in this next passage strangely kind of echoes these cycles of neglect in terms of that kind of treatment of the yew that was just described. And she writes, "We live in disturbing times, mixed up times, troubling and turbid times. Mixed up times are overflowing with vastly unjust patterns of pain and joy, with unnecessary killing of ongoingness, but also with necessary resurgence. The task is to make kin in lines of inventive connection as a practice of learning to live and die well with each other in a thick present." And I just really like this suggestion, to live and die well with each other in a thick present. And the single branch that you can see kind of the ghostly imprint of in this image on the left was sustainably obtained in a forest in Oregon and produced as a composite by exposing multiple sheets of paper underneath the branch at once. And so this method results in kind of an image that is both complete and coherent, but also separate and fragmentary. And I brought this branch back to my home studio and looked at it again and again, recording it a bit differently each time. And in this instance, I used a flatbed scanner, and that's a method that really reproduces the branch with so much almost three-dimensional detail, but it's still a method or a process that is, it's unable to contain this object with any kind of singularity. And so I find myself associating this kind of fragmentation with grief and mourning as a durational process that we kind of slip in and out of, both as individuals and also culturally, over prolonged periods. And these periods are messy and certainly not linear. And I think of the method of installation for these works as a bit of kind of a deliberate mess of representation, or as entanglements, as Dana Haraway might say. And so these layers of time and representation deliberately repeat in their various kind of analog, digital, still, and moving forms, referencing one another from the wall to the screen to the book and back again, and really as a set of conditions. And in her book, The Nick of Time, philosopher and feminist theorist Elizabeth Grosz suggests that we have forgotten the nature, the ontology of the body, the conditions under which bodies are enculturated, psychologized, given identity, historical locations, and agency. So there is repetition, duration, exhaustion, all having to do with endurance. Thinking, of course, about these trees, but also of ourselves and our own bodies, our own histories, our own perceptions. And it's in this kind of looking again and again at a set of things. Here, it's just kind of a scanned strips of Super 8 film with the tiniest little versions of one of the trees repeated over and over again. And repeatedly setting up new conditions. So trying to find out what else I can see or describe. Also letting things remain hidden or just kind of barely discernible. So with an image like this on the left, it's really only with a slow and careful observation that you can sort of make note of the strips of film that are emerging from underneath this kind of murky veil of dried yew leaves. And so with a work like this, time is really leaving its trace on two materials at once. So it's the film stock that's running across the paper and that you can see being treated with a toning solution in the video still on the right. And then of course the paper itself, which acts as this substrate and container. So I guess I use photosensitivity in every way I can conceive, which is really just to bring something into being. So using it in its most simplistic manner here, these sun-exposed or developed analog forms, as composite forms and sequences of stills as film and video, and scanned and digitized materials and video capture. And so all of these different methods record and imprint, document and trace, and often the imagery is somewhat or entirely abstract, but the details of each moment remain legible somehow in these marks. And for me, these marks connect to how Deleuze describes a scar as the sign not of a past wound, but of the present fact of having been wounded. We can say that is the contemplation of the wound, that it contracts all the instants which separate us from it into a living present. And this way of thinking through pain is present here as well in the New Wolf excerpt, where she writes, "Bowed down she was with weariness, but hobbled to her feet again, pulled herself up as if after all she had consolations, as indeed there twined about her dirge some incorrigible hope." And that last bit of phrasing from Virginia Woolf encompasses so much of what I'm thinking about when I describe certain aspects of this project as embracing a kind of radical despair. So radical is in completely changing the nature of something. And the use of music in the video component of the work is really attempting to connect with despair in this kind of transformative manner. And the poetics and musicality of the soundtrack arrangement and the visual components are meant to kind of work in tandem as a sort of slowly building heavy intensity. And the way the soundtrack components came about was quite simply by asking a group of musician friends to gather in a recording studio and make something brutal and dirge-like. And they did, and it was amazing, and it made me incredibly happy. But this process of recording was, of course, equally fragmented, as is the nature of recording music. So ultimately, only bits and pieces of individual tracks were incorporated into what would become the whole. So these considerations of recording and fragmentation also extend to the large-scale prints on vinyl that sit behind the frameworks in the exhibition. And the composite vinyl prints are really generated from the elements in the framed works above or in front. So this grouping of work stems from just this ongoing set of questions that I'm constantly thinking through. You know, what is possible within a document or a record? What can be revealed? What remains hidden, unseen, or unheard? And I want to start bringing these thoughts to a close with one of my favorite passages from Deleuze, where he writes, "Indifference has two aspects, the undifferentiated abyss, the black nothingness in which everything is dissolved, but also the white nothingness, the once more calm surface upon which float unconnected determinations like scattered members, a head without a neck, an arm without a shoulder, eyes without brows." And I, of course, just love the image that's conjured there. So this kind of sea of indifference, you know, bits and pieces of, you know, things that are scattered or invisible. And I find it to be quite sad also thinking indifference in this way as a means of distinguishing one thing from another, of course, having to see or find the thing to do so, and sometimes being unable to. And I feel like this describes photography really, and film and audio and video recording and all of these modes of reproduction. And so ultimately, I guess I knew all along it was really the resilience of this tree that I love so much, the way it survives right alongside of us, able to return to formative rates of growth at almost any stage in its long life, at times from vigorous regeneration after catastrophic damage. But my appreciation and love for this tree just became more apparent through each interaction or attempt at reproduction. And I'm just going to leave us with this slightly paraphrased excerpt from Audrey and Rich's poem, "What Kind of Times Are These?" written in 1991, where she's responding to the question posed by Brecht decades earlier. She writes, "I won't tell you where the place is, the dark mesh of woods, meeting the unmarked strip of light. ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf mold paradise. I won't tell you where it is, so why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen. Because in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees. And that's what I'm going to leave us with. And I didn't cry. I'm clapping for not crying. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing all of that with us. I feel your work and just hearing you talk about the process and the context for the work and these beautiful quotes is so poetic and evocative and so timely and poignant for us to consider today. So I hope those who are joining us tonight put their comments and questions in the comment box for Dawn. But I was wondering, as we give everyone a chance to submit their questions, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how this landscape in the Pacific Northwest that is your home too, and it's so familiar to you. How did it change you to make this project, to do this project there, to see that landscape from perhaps a different perspective after having lived there for so long and now interacting with nature in this way?
It certainly made me look more closely and patiently. And I mean, honestly, I told people this is one of the most personal projects I've ever made, and I kind of just allowed. I was resistant of working in that way for a long time, but just realized there's a lot embedded in this that's related to everything that I just talked about, but I wouldn't be connecting to it that way if it wasn't also so personal. So it's, I mean, that's kind of what I meant about these notions of radical despair as well. There's a version of one of my many versions of project notes where I wrote about this and talked about the sight of clear-cut hillsides that just were in the 90s. That's all you would see when you were, and you still see them, unfortunately, not to the same extent. But so there, I mean, I guess I'm not answering this question very well, but basically it made me reflect on what I had seen or what I did see in the 90s and how certain things were the same, but that I was noticing aspects that I wasn't as quite familiar with before. I certainly got to know a lot of forest spaces much better and worked with a lot of people who gave me such great insights that were very generous with me too.
Thank you. There's a question here from Margaret. She says she likes the integration of the quotes with the work, and she wants to know if you found specific quotes to fit the images.
Yeah, I work in a very random way, fragmented, not unlike. So when I'm working on any project, I'm kind of collecting things, and I've just got this massive material, and I've got books aplenty with Post-it notes a crazy going on. And so in this instance, when I put the book together, it was more about trying to figure out how I could incorporate those like sort of data-based bits of research with aspects of poetry and philosophical, like bits from philosophical texts. They weren't meant to necessarily match the image, but they were meant to sort of help with the flow in relation to the video. I think I've described it as to someone the other night as kind of, the book is kind of this film essay form, I feel like. So it's not so much a match as a correspondence, which is another way of saying matching, I guess, but it's slightly different.
But it's all part of the experience that comes together, right, for the viewer, for the audience tonight. Anna has a comment and a question here. She says, I've always appreciated the interdisciplinary inherent in your work. I'm wondering if your teaching has influenced you going into such a multidisciplinary practice, or conversely, is that what drew you to teaching? Could you be a chicken?
Yeah,
could be a chicken and egg question.
I would mostly say it's what drew me to teaching at a liberal arts college, actually. It's why I'm excited and why I love the kinds of things we get to do here, which are not, entirely distinct from what one can do in studio art programs that are, structured differently, but it's so embraced here, that kind of interdisciplinarity, that is definitely, because I've been able to incorporate so much of it into my teaching, it's it's definitely allowed me to run with it, and maybe, yeah, definitely a more extensive way than I had prior to really, I've been here for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years now. So yeah, but chicken and egg a bit, Anna, yes.
What would you say to students who come to see the exhibition, or to any visitor who comes to see the exhibition, who maybe they don't know you personally, or maybe they don't know a lot of your experience and your story? What would you like them to take away from experiencing your installation? Because there are different ways of interacting with your work, right? There's the video piece, the audio component, as you said, the book, and the wall-mounted pieces. So what would you say?
Well, I always say this, that I hope that my work inspires a certain kind of patience and a slowness, and that people, and it's been great, I've been in there a few times and I've seen people interacting with each component and finding those links, because I do think you're informed by engaging with the whole of it. And so I do hope that people consider the connections between ourselves, our environments, and one another. And I want, it's pretty affect heavy, so I want there to be some kind of emotive response that different people connect with in different ways. So
it's opened the door, right? It's opening the door to that kind of engagement and interaction.
Yeah.
Rachel has a comment and a question. She says, I love the way that you talk about grief in your work. How has this evolved over the years? Has the work deepened your own understanding of grief?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I meant again by this notion of radical despair. Like I haven't endured grief that's much different from the kind of grief that anyone else has endured, but it's, I've had some meaningful losses in my life, and it's kind of amazing how much that loss stays with you. And I mean, it's very present for me right now, some of the things I'm thinking about. So I can, most of my work deals with, or maybe all of my work deals with grief, honestly. And I just think it's such a, despair and grief are so powerful. It's just so laden with energy that we should, harness that and use it. Because it's going to be something that persists in our lives. So how can we kind of take that energy and be somewhat productive, find ways to be productive in our grief, which may sound ridiculous, but that's all I've been doing to try and keep going every day.
Right. I was wondering if that's one of the, I guess this relates to Dana's question. I was going to ask if that's the most challenging. Do you find that to be the most challenging part of your work? She says they're watching on the big screen, and she wants to know if you find your work sometimes to be emotionally challenging, that you need to take a step back from it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but the weird thing is, as any artist, we work on our stuff for so long and we're so fixated on it and so close to it that it loses its effect on me a lot too. So I need to go away so I can come back to it and make sure that it's still sort of operating in the way that I want it to. I don't know, it's one of the reasons I've been reluctant to allow for a kind of this level of personal engagement with the work, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, everyone that knows me, I mean, I cry all the time. So it's just like, I don't know, that's just part of my practice and part of my work, and working through that. I mean, the world is a devastating place, unfortunately. And a beautiful place.
Yeah, and it can be both simultaneously, right? And we so appreciate that your generosity and being open to sharing these things with us as your audience tonight, and with the visitors to the exhibition. I think one of the interesting things for me as I walk through the gallery and experience your work and the work of the other artists in the exhibition is this shared concern for our relationship with nature, and therefore our relationship with each other, from very different perspectives and very different medium and very different angles for all of the artists included. And so I very much appreciate you sharing all of that with us. Is there anything else that you want to add, Dawn, before we switch over to Rachel and Lee?
No, I think that's it. I just want to echo what you just said. I do hope everyone that's able to get to the exhibition can see it, because there are so many wonderful links between our projects in this iteration. So I just love the exhibition, and thank you for hosting it.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much, Dawn. So now we're gonna switch to our next set of speakers. We're gonna be hearing from Professor Rachel Simmons, who is a professor in the Art and Art History Department, who specializes in screen printing and relief printmaking, mixed media and drawing, and of course, book arts. And with her is her collaborator and partner and also exhibiting artist, Professor Lee Lines, who is a professor in the Environmental Studies Department, who is a specialist on physical geography and climate change and sustainable development, among many other things. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll have more time for Q&A after their presentation.
Thank you, Gisela. I'm gonna start off. Lee and I are gonna trade places multiple times because we're collaborators on this project. So I'm Rachel Simmons, and I teach in the Department of Art and Art History, and I specialize in artist books and printmaking. And I'm gonna walk you through a kind of unique collaboration that I've been involved with Lee for, oh my gosh, 11 years now. And so I'm going to just show you some slides. I'm going to be talking about Visible Climate, Postcards from America's Changing Landscapes, which is both an artist book and a print installation. But before I do, I want to give you some background on our collaboration. So we began working together in 2010, and we were introduced to a shared student. She was a double major in studio art and environmental studies, and wanted to collaborate with us on a summer research project, which Rollins hosts and has generously been supporting for many years. The research project took us to Iceland, where we experienced firsthand how their strong interest in sustainability and also their respect for the landscape as a place where cultural memory is stored, how that has shaped their landscape over time. And since this first project, we've collaborated on a number of different projects, from artist books to prints to drawings, all exploring the relationship between scale, sustainability, and climate change. And we see our collaboration very much as a dialogue between art and science. We feel like they work in a symbiotic way to help us explore all this complexity around sustainability. So you're looking at an image from our very first trip to Iceland in 2010. They use a lot of greenhouses to grow produce and flowers in Iceland. And it's one of those markers of the sustainable landscape. They're mostly powered by geothermal energy, which is quite easy to attain in Iceland, given that they're sitting on top of a rift in the sea, and they have tons of volcanic activity going on. So they have hydroelectricity and geothermal power as well. We also documented lots of significant cultural markers in the landscape, and lots of different natural, from mountains to rivers, glaciers, icebergs, saw a lot of different types of landscapes. So we started to combine these images into these overlapped images. These are a blend between print out. We produced a series of these postcard style images. We're always working with postcards, and exhibited them at the Orlando Museum of Art in 2013, and also in previous iterations of the faculty show at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. So these are small images, but they're all done with the same process of transferring 2 images or sometimes 3 images together, and then drawing or painting on top of them. And Lee and I both supply images for our work. At least in this stage of our work, it was mainly a mixture of images from locations around the world, not just Iceland. And we also spend a lot of time talking about sustainability, climate change, how artists think and how artists make decisions, how scientists think and how they make decisions, how we present our work to the public. And we go through a lot of different iterations of the work. This is just a kind of mock-up sketch that we started working with ages ago, but you can see our early interest in incorporating text into our work. This brings me to an artist book. This one's called Transect, and it's a wall-based artist book that was displayed in Iceland in an exhibition called Precipice that included my colleagues Dana Hargrove and Don Rowe. And it was shown at the Dieglin Gallery in Akureyri, Iceland. So this book is an interesting take on our project. It gave us a moment to do some personal reflection on our memories of the Icelandic landscape using our photographs. And we incorporated a particular process known as gel transfer, which is very hard to control and produces a lot of unexpected, I would call them like riffs in the image. So the series became again about time and the effects of time on landscape and on memory as well. And we both used handwriting in this book to express sort of a mixture between field notes and a kind of diaristic, memory-based recollection of our time there. So this is a more recent image that I created. Actually in 2020, I visited the Royal Gorge in Colorado, Canyon City, Colorado. And on the left, there's a vintage postcard, probably from the 30s. And you can see it's the photograph that's been hand colored. And then I stood in exactly the same place on this suspension bridge over 1,000 feet up and took the same image. Just as a way of talking about postcards and posters and promotional materials for landscapes and the saturated colors that they use. And we'll definitely be talking more about this as we get into the next part of the project. So this is Visible Climate as it started. This was our artist book that we produced in 2020 last year. And it was many years in the making. We spent, Lee spent over around 200 hours of time in the field documenting our national parks. And we were looking to research what the impacts of climate change are in the national parks, which is hard to see. We're trying to make the invisible visible, basically. And so this artist book was a collaborative process of trying to translate some of that scientific evidence and research into a kind of visual form that would be compelling, personal, and engage the kind of broader audience in a discussion about how important the parks are and how they're affected by climate change, just like really anything else. And so I'm not going to play much of this video, but if you'd like to see the work and you can't get to the museum to see it, there is a YouTube video that you can find easily on our website where you can look through the book and follow along with it. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lee. He's going to introduce more about the research, and then you'll hear from me again, and I'll talk about the process that we use to create these images.
All right. Thanks, Rachel, and thank you to everybody for coming out this evening. I usually like to start when I'm giving a talk. I usually like to start with something funny or amusing, but I really couldn't think of anything amusing about climate change, so I'm just going to launch right into it here. I guess that's amusing that I couldn't think of anything that was amusing. What I'm going to share with you is some of the fieldwork aspects, some of the deeper fieldwork aspects of the work, and this really goes back throughout the collaboration with Rachel in Iceland. Lots of our conversations have been about climate change, and really going all the way back to my time as a graduate student in Arizona. I'd really been following this growing body of evidence that has been coming together from scientists from all different branches of science that is really documenting climate change impacts in the United States and across North America. And many of these impacts are really concentrated in the West, and so but lots of them are also in the East as well. And striking really dramatic changes that are underway. For example, in the southwestern U.S., where they've been in the grips of an exceptional drought period for most of the past 25 years or so. It's reduced the flows of water on the Colorado River by about 20%. And it's led to all sorts of extreme climate events throughout the western United States. And obviously, many of you have probably heard about these. We've got extended droughts that have triggered wildfires that have just utterly transformed many areas throughout the western United States, many different habitats. And in following and sort of really following this literature for a long time and all of this research, I was really struck by the contrast between the invisibility of the gases that are causing all of this, carbon dioxide and water vapor, which are really invisible, against the actual impacts themselves, which increasingly are becoming highly visible in these landscapes. And these are some of the most cherished and iconic landscapes across the United States, from Mesa Verde National Park to Mount Rainier National Park, the Everglades. And the second thing that I was really struck by in really digging into all of this research is the contrast between the dramatic images and dramatic changes that are occurring in these landscapes and many of the sort of idealized images that we have about these landscapes that sort of circulate around our popular culture and our collective imagination. And this goes all the way back to the WPA posters, the series of posters that were created in the 1930s and 40s. I think many of you are probably familiar with these. They have a very distinctive color palette, very distinctive font style, and they continue to be reproduced even up to the present day. Many artists are continuing to reproduce these posters, which are focused both on national parks and other sort of iconic landscapes across the United States. And these mostly have sort of helped to distill these very sort of idealized images in the collective imagination about these places. And so that distinctive or that distinction between the rapid changes that are underway versus these idealized images, I could really see that there was a tension there. And Rachel and I began talking about this a lot around 2016, 2017. And one of the things that Rachel had is this amazing collection of postcards going back to the 1920s and 30s, which were also part of this sort of idealized, iconic representations of a lot of these landscapes. And these were really postcard series that they were generated to try to lure tourists out to the western United States in the early days of the railroads back in the 20s and 30s, trying to get tourists to come out and visit these sites in the western United States. And obviously for people back east, these postcards and posters played a big role in shaping people's perceptions and popular perceptions of these western landscapes. And so for many of these postcards, right, they had sort of this hyper-real color palette to them, and that very distinctive motif that I think is pretty familiar to a lot of people in the US. So as Rachel and I began talking about this more and more, we started exploring the possibility of using these color palettes to try to develop a visual language to communicate climate change science to the wider public, and to try to use the distinctive motif and design elements of some of these posters and postcards to sort of pull people in to better understand a lot of the changes that are underway across these landscapes. And so in 2017, 2018, really in early 2017, I took a very deep dive into the literature on climate change. This is a literature I've been following because I teach a lot about this in my courses, but I really dug in and really tried to zero in on all the latest research of what was happening in the parks. And of course, the very first park that I focused on was Everglades National Park. And I set out for most of the year in 2017 and 2018 to visit these locations and begin to document these changes with photographs. And so here in Everglades National Park, there are many, many changes underway that scientists have been documenting. Most of them relate to a rise in sea level of about 10 inches over the past 100 years. And saltwater intrusion into the groundwater in the Everglades, and in particular, the shifting boundaries of saltwater habitats and freshwater habitats. And so this photograph was taken right on the leading edge of this sort of zone of mangroves that has been steadily moving into Everglades National Park really for the past 30 or 40 years, moving into the interior of the park. The work also took me out west, where I spent quite a bit of time in Joshua Tree National Park, documenting a lot of the changes occurring there, having to do with these extreme climate events, extended droughts, and fire events, which are not really normally a natural part of the ecosystem here, which are causing a major demographic shift in the Joshua Tree population. And so what we're seeing in Joshua Tree are very few juvenile Joshua trees to replace the aging Joshua trees. And in many landscapes, most of what we have are very mature trees, but very few juvenile trees coming in because of all of these fire events and extreme drought events and some of the heat waves. And so this is, once again, a very iconic landscape. Joshua trees are only found here in this part of Southern California and Arizona and no place else in the world. And the Joshua trees themselves support an entire ecosystem of lots of other animal species that use those trees as a refuge and kind of a cool microclimate in a really hot environment. And so in the process of doing this fieldwork, I spent more than 200 hours more than 200 hours in the field, and I was able to go back and visit lots of places that I had previously explored through fieldwork with other projects. Places where I've taken students on field study trips, but this time I was there with a very clear eye for documenting and getting really good photographs of all these changes that are underway. And thankfully, one of the parks, Mount Rainier National Park, has a fantastic photo archive, which I've actually been exploring since the early 2000s, with a great photographic record of the locations of glaciers and all kinds of glacial features. There are 25 major glaciers in Mount Rainier National Park, and all 25 are either thinning or they're in full retreat. Here's a photograph of the Nisqually Glacier Terminus in 1932. There actually used to be an ice cream stand at the base of that glacier back in the day, and they would chip off blocks of ice to keep the ice cream cool for visitors to the park. Here's a photograph from even earlier of the Nisqually Glacier from 1916. And you can see it's just a really robust glacier. It's a very large ice field extending very far down this valley. Here's the same location today. You can see right in the center of the photograph, the dark zone in the center is actually the Glacier Terminus. It's very dark because there's as the ice melts back, there's lots of dark rock and sediment that is exposed. And this glacier has moved about 1.5 miles upslope since the early 1900s. And so major changes underway here. As the glaciers melt back, they release tremendous amounts of sediment downstream, and these big debris flows and floods have devastated old-growth forests downstream and buried forests in glacial sediment. And many of the historic cultural features in Mount Rainier National Park are also very much under threat by this. They've actually had to build defensive earthworks around the Longmire National Historic District, which has all these great examples of early national park architecture, just to protect that area of the park from the debris flows and floods. So, this was a really great process of just being long days in the field, hiking to locations that were referred to in journals, and being able to photographically document all of these features. Really a great experience for me as a geographer. And so the last little bit I'm going to leave you with here is a couple of photographs from Mesa Verde National Park, which has also experienced really significant impacts from climate change. And in particular, the 600 cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde, which, because of widespread extreme climate events, drought events, they've had major forest fires here. And those fires have gotten into those archaeological features. Planes have had to dump fire retardant on the structures, which has impacted the structures. Carbonized material has gotten into those archaeological features. And in many cases, the loss of the forest cover above those cliff dwellings has caused erosion down below. And just an utter transformation of the landscape. This is a photograph I took up on Weatherrill Mesa in Mesa Verde National Park. And this was an area that once looked like this. I'm sorry. It was a pinyon juniper woodland, which supported a wide range of wildlife and biodiversity. And today, that same landscape has really been reduced to a kind of ghost forest. And as these big fires that came through in the year 2000, as you can see in the photograph, there are no more juvenile pinyon pine trees or juniper trees coming up to replace that forest, and it's really reverting into a kind of dryland, grassland ecosystem. It's a very different kind of ecosystem from what used to be there. So that's really the field component, and a lot of the baseline images that form the basis of the project was what I was after with this field component. And so now Rachel is going to share with you some of our process of transforming these images into the images that you see in the exhibition.
Thanks, Lee. So I'm just going to take you through one image. This is, you just saw this. This is Lee's image from Everglades National Park. So our process is full of rich discussion. We talk about every decision that we're going to make together. We don't work in isolation from one another. We collaborate on every aspect of the project. And so we choose the images that we're going to work with together. And we chose this one. Once I get the photograph from Lee, I usually reduce it to black and white, and I'll increase the contrast as needed. Then I make a photocopy, essentially, of that work. And with photocopies, you can do something called a transfer. And you just use a regular household like acetone, which takes your nail polish off. It's just a very mild kind of solvent. And the goal is to take the image from the copy and transfer it onto a sturdier paper to work with. Not just that, but the process always does unexpected things. That's kind of a thread, I think, that runs through this work and my work in general. Is I like to have a certain amount of planning, and then unexpected things will happen. So I'm putting the copy face down on some heavyweight watercolor paper, and I'm using the acetone to brush through the back of the paper. So that's going to release that toner and make that image malleable. It's now I'm going to run it through this press. This is our Charles Brand etching press in the printmaking studio at Rollins. And it's applying a lot of pressure to the back of that paper. So while the toner is activated and wet, and the pressure is going to push it through to this other sheet of paper. And you'll immediately see that the image is radically different. The edges have the brush marks from the brush that I just used, and there's an overall significant alteration in the photograph itself. It doesn't retain all of the original information. It's vastly reduced, but there's such a wonderful quality to that. We really like the way that that works to talk about the degradation of the landscape, to talk about time, to talk about the effects of climate. And then I'm able to take these raw transfers and I work back over them. So I use watercolor like this, or I'll use digital watercolor, and I'll use charcoal pencils, all kinds of different mixed media tools to go in and highlight certain areas and bring out formal qualities of some areas and let other areas subside in the background. The colorization goes back to this hyper-real, almost, you know, kind of semi-sickly palette at times that we picked up from some of these vintage postcards, things that, you know, like, it's just a little weird. It's weird enough to catch your eye and make you wonder why it's colored this way, why the sky is this particular kind of turquoise. And you'll see in some of the other images that the sky colors can be really extreme. So that's the process that we go through. And text is a huge component of the work. You've probably already noticed that we've used handwriting in our work before. So this is Lee's handwriting, and it's really not much different than his normal everyday handwriting. He practiced and took a little bit more time with this, but his handwriting is almost excruciatingly neat, which I love. So we use it a lot in the project as a kind of font of our own. And we wanted to have him write it because he was out doing the field work. These messages that show up in the book are meant to be like what you might read on the back side of the postcard. So instead of, we're having a great time, wish you were here, you get a message that's sort of a longing for the landscape that used to be there. You get to sort of understand a little bit of the science. It's very gently applied into these narratives. We wanted it to feel very personal. We wanted readers to connect with the narrator and not feel like they were getting a science lecture. So it was very important for us to strike the right tone with the text in the book. Here's an example of one of the images paired with the text, and it says, "We hike for hours trying to find the spot where the photo from the old postcard was taken. Joshua trees found only in the Mojave Desert of the American Southwest and no other place on Earth," the caption reads. "A time capsule from the days before drought and wildfires transformed the place." So our goal is to, again, try to encapsulate some of the research, but also encapsulate that other really important component, which is our love for the national parks. And, you know, what we're seeing is this, these rapid changes that are contributing to such loss. It's hard to kind of grapple with all of that at the same time. So this is us installing the work at the museum. We had lots of help. We did not do this by ourselves. But we do like to work together very closely. So we like to make all the decisions together and in terms of how things are hung and arranged. And we incorporated this outline of the United States to reference the geography of the research, but not pin it down in a very literal way. And underneath all of the images are captions that are on the wall that tell you very specifically about the time and date and location that the original photographs were taken. And Lee is like a human compass, so he always knows exactly where he is when he's taking these photos. And then the artist book is displayed in front of the exhibition wall. So this kind of gives you a sense of what that looks like. And we're so grateful to the CFAM staff. They did an amazing job with the installation of all the faculty works, but we were just so pleased about how this came out. As Don was mentioning before, the faculty show is this wonderful opportunity for us to put new work up and have this professional, beautifully managed space in which to experiment and try new things. And so we're always really delighted for the opportunity to do that. The things that you'll notice that are here are new prints. These are all digital prints. Some of them are from the artist book and some of them are new. So they're images from Acadia National Park, images from Walden Pond, images from the shoreline of Florida. And so we're continuing this series of works, and we're really interested in again, adding more locations and adding more imagery to the body of work. You can kind of see this piece up close. So those are the slides, and we're really excited to answer questions that you have. You might be wondering how a science person and an art person work together, what kind of fist fights we get into, you know, whatever. You might have some curiosity about that. You can find out more about the project on my website at rachelsimmons.net. And the books themselves are for purchase at the CFAM Museum store during the duration of the exhibition. So we're thankful to Dina Mack for making that happen too.
All right, thank you so much, Lee and Rachel. I think I learned so much just by listening both of you talk about the process and some of these very important issues. We have a couple of questions coming in. If you hang on for a few minutes with us, Anna asks, Lee specifically, how is working with Rachel, how have working with Rachel and your art projects influence your research and teaching?
Oh, wow. Let's see, am I muted here? Okay. Where do I begin? It's in so many different ways. Because we have this process where we really sort of talk through, we both look at things often in a very different way. Rachel has gotten me out of my literalness. You know, as a physical geographer, I'm often really sort of looking at things in a much more sort of literal, sort of scientific viewpoint. But I think also in my courses, my coverage of climate change, you know, I'm just thinking about a few days ago in my class, we had this beautiful conversation about how we reach the American public with all of this science and how do we communicate this. And a lot of the students, we were having this great conversation about visual communication and the role of museums and films, and that being such a powerful force for sort of galvanizing public attention to try to address these problems. So in so many ways, I think working with Rachel has just broadened my way of looking at the problem, and she's got me thinking much more visually in so many different ways as I think about all of the science here.
And it's just a way, I guess, for, as you said, you know, making all these big issues for people like me who are not scientists. Maybe the manifestation of it through art helps me understand the gravity of it and the importance of it, and opens that door as well. Grace says that the video showing the process is so interesting. I feel the same way. I never understood how it's done, and now we see in much more detail with those videos that this is a multi-layered process, right? There's so much research, there's accumulation of data, there is note-taking, and then the personal investment also in working with the imagery. Richard asks, where did you see the most dramatic changes?
Oh, that's a tough call. I mean, I think the most visibly dramatic changes are probably Mount Rainier National Park, where so many of those glaciers have the valleys below the glaciers themselves have just totally transformed. I think a lot of people who spent time climbing around in those glaciers, I think, have really taken note of the dramatic changes there. But in some places, the changes are more subtle. The changes at Joshua Tree are much more subtle. But when you really go out there with an eye for the sort of changing demographics of the Joshua trees, you really do start to notice sections of the park where you really don't see a lot of juvenile Joshua trees coming in. And so it varies a lot from park to park, but I would probably have to say Mont Rainier would be the most dramatic.
Rachel, what has it been like for you as an artist now that you've had this collaboration for so many years? How has it impacted your visual language and your approach to art making?
Oh, like tremendously. I mean, I learned so much from Lee all the time. He's just this wealth of information about what's going on in the landscape. And I really enjoy just our back and forth. We could just sit and talk for hours about images and the qualities of images and what they convey. And we both share a love of just being outdoors, you know, and hiking and camping and being in the parks. So it's so nice for me to be able to create a body of work that I wouldn't otherwise make, right? If I made this body of work, it would be really different. And I'm so grateful that I get to make it, you know, with somebody who's like so passionate about the topic, but also who's willing to, you know, get out of his comfort zone and try different things. So it's really fun. We have a lot of fun together, and I think we, you know, have learned a lot about each other's disciplines by working together as well, which is it's like I never wanted to stop going to school, and I don't have to because I continually learn from my colleagues. It's great.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing there, and Rachel getting out to these sites as well, and then me being involved in the process with the images, I feel like it really is a true collaboration. It's not just a splitting of the work, but we truly are embedded and immersed in all the different aspects of the project, which is really wonderful.
Which is why it takes us a while to make things too.
Yeah.
But then you make beautiful things, right? And important things. And we're so fortunate to have them here in the gallery for our visitors and for our students. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes for one last question. Richard asks, he says, I like the fact that you document and communicate without using maps. You chose a more human point of view. Was that considered and discarded?
Well, I'll start with just a simple response. You know, as a geographer, I'm always thinking in terms of maps, and I think what's been really good about this collaboration is Rachel has really got me to think about sort of what is it that will have a sort of powerful impact on people's perceptions of a lot of these issues, and you know, she's really pushed me out of my comfort zone at times because my natural tendency is to drop back to the things I'm familiar with, which is displaying information in maps. And yeah, I think the visual images, I think, do work in such a different way from anything we could do with maps and more science-focused things.
Thank you for that. One last point here from Anna. I think she's recruited you, Lee, as a spokesperson for the museum and teaching with art. I think both of these projects, Dawn's and yours, everything that's included in this exhibition, but in particular, the ones that we talked about today, and in your case especially, you know, it's a great example of what we do here at Rollins and this interdisciplinary connections that take shape sometimes across departments and sometimes over many years, as is your case, Rachel and Lee. And I think it's a great illustration of cross-field collaboration and the fact that art can teach us about really any topic. And I love that part. So with that, if we can bring back Dawn, I think we have come to the end of our time here tonight. There are still some comments and questions coming in the comment box, so we'll try to address all of them after this presentation is over. Thank you all so much, Rachel, Lee, and Dawn, for sharing your practice and your beautiful artwork with us tonight.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
For those who join us, thank you so much for joining us. Visit our website, rollins.edu/CFAM, for more on this exhibition and all of our other exhibitions. And remember, the 2021 Faculty Biennial will be up until August 29th. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.